Hey everyone, today we're going to be building Sudoku. If you click on a cell, it will highlight it in blue and will also highlight the row and the column in the 3x3 grid. If you don't know how Sudoku works, every row, every column, and every 3x3 grid have to have unique numbers from 1 to 9. So for example, 1 cannot be in the cell because there's already a 1 in the column and is also a 1 in this 3x3 grid. You can also, let's say you made a big mistake. Oh no, that can't be right. Reset and it will bring it back to the original board. If you think this puzzle is too hard, you can click on new puzzle and it will generate a new puzzle. And there's also a check button here that will check if the puzzle is correct. Let me skip to when I have completed this puzzle. I'm back. I solved it legit. Okay, now let's check our answers. And it's correct. And it's going to do a sweet green animation. Awesome. I'll break this video down into 3 main parts so you can follow along easily. 1 is the setup. 2 is the components, the grid, the controls down here, and finally the puzzle fetching. We're going to connect to a Sudoku API and we're going to make it work. By the end, you'll have a complete game you can show off to your friends. Let's jump in. Everyone knows that setup is boring, so let's make this quick. Head over to this website, build a React app from scratch, install a build tool. Vite is what we're going to be using. It's a build tool that's simple, easy, modern, and fast. Copy this, paste, replace my app with Sudoku or whatever you want to name your project. CD into the project folder. Install the dependencies. Finally, let's run the development server. Let's go into our Explorer sidebar, open Sudoku, and we can see a few files here. First of all, app.jsx refers to this page that we're currently seeing, and we can delete it because we won't need it. Okay, so now everything is gone. Also, we can delete app.css. Everything in there can be gone. Finally, we can change this Vite plus React title up here by going into index.html and changing this title here. If you have your own icon, you can put it in the public folder and refer to it in this href here. So you can see this vite.svg refers to this file, and that is the file that's being used for the icon. One more thing, if we were to type a function from React, for example, use state, you can see that the autocomplete isn't working. What we need to do is to add a new file, call it jsconfig.json, and input these contents. Now if you go back and type use state, you could see it appears here. If you click on it or if you press enter, it will automatically import. In the app component, let's create an outer container with text-align style of center. Inside the container, let's add our title, Sudoku. And let's render a grid. So this grid will be our own component. Let's make a components folder in our source. This will have the grid file. Let's create an empty grid component for now. Exports it. Now we can import in app. You can see the Sudoku is not in the middle of the page. Let's fix that. Go into index.css and over here, instead of place items center, we use justify content center and align items center. Now over to our grid component, let's return an outer container. Give it a class name of container. And we will make a 9x9 table. Let's create a board variable. This will symbolize the Sudoku board, so it will be 9x9. We could do this by initializing an array of 9 elements, filling it with null. This will be the rows, and we map over each row and make another array with 9 elements. This will be the columns, and we fill it with null. Let's do Ctrl B to close the Explorer. To visualize our board here, it'll be a 2D array. So this will be the outer array, and the inner array will be null, null, 9 times, and then again null, null, 9 times, and we do this again 9 times. So it symbolizes the numbers in our grid. So if you go to the first element, that will be the 0th row and 0th column, which will be the top left number. Right now it's null, but we'll worry about the numbers later. In our T body, let's map over the board. We take in the row and the row index. And for each row, let's return a table row with the key of the index. And now let's populate these rows. So we go row, map, and now we have 9 values in a row, right? That would be the cell index. Let's make a variable that determines if a cell is pre-filled. What that means is if a cell is pre-filled, then that means it was given by the puzzle. This puzzle is also a 2D array. So to get a cell from this puzzle, we need to index it, get the row, and then get the column. So now we need to check if it's pre-filled. If it's not null, then that means it's pre-filled. Let's create a puzzle variable the same way as we created our board variable. We'll be changing this later when we get to the fetching part. Now let's return our cell. Let's put an input element. This allows us to change the number. Put the max length as 1 because we only need 1 digit. For our value, if the cell is null, we want to display an empty string. So we don't display anything. Otherwise, we display the number. If it's pre-filled, the input will be read-only, so we can't edit it. Let's put empty on focus, on click, and also on change. Cool, as we can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9 rows here and 9 columns going this way. Let's make it look better. Control P or Command P to search for files. Let's go to app.css and now let's style our container. So now we have a nice white background around our cells. Let's style the table. Let's put a border collapse. Set it to collapse. This will collapse all of the cells together so they will be closer together. Now our cells. Let's add the cell class into this element, the table data element. Now let's get these in the right shape so we can style our input element. Let's put border to none so it makes it more compact. If we click on this, you can see a white border around our cell. We don't want that. Let's just remove it. There we go. Let's make the background of the cells white. Now if we're typing a number here, you can't see it because it's white. Let's put color equals black. So now we can see our number. And instead of making this the cursor like this, let's make it have the regular cursor. So it looks like this now. When we're focusing on an input, we can see this line up here. Let's remove that. So now you can't see anything. So let's make it into the blue color that we saw before. Now that we click on this, we can see where we're editing. It's blue. Now in a Sudoku game, we have every 3x3 needs to be a thicker border to separate these into groups. Let's add that border to the left as well. We're reusing this in multiple places. Let's make a variable. Now let's put a border in the first row, the third row, sixth row, and ninth row. Cool, now that we have them in separate groups. When we select a cell, then the row and the column and the 3x3 grid will also be highlighted. Let's do that right now. Let's move our board and puzzle over to the app component and let's pass it to the grid. Consume it here. Let's create a selected state. It'll be null for now. This will be a row column value. Let's pass this into our grid component. on the onFocus and onClick function, this is where we set our selected. Takes in the row and the column. Do the same thing for onClick. Now we're going to put some classes into the cell. To make things easier, let's install the class names package. With that package, it allows us to assign class names in a much cleaner fashion. Let me show you. So we want to assign 3 different class names here. Same box, which is the 3 by 3 grid, same row, and same column. And each of these has a conditional attached to it. Let's try to assign the class names without the package first. Start off with cell. And now we start assigning the class names. If a cell's row index is the same as the first value of selected, which is the row, then we add in the same row class. Otherwise, if the column index is the same as the second value of selected, which refers to the columns, then we add in the same call class. Remember, these spaces are very important, otherwise the class name would be like this. And we need them to be separated. If we have a selection and the row index divided by 3 is equal to the selection divided by 3 and the same with the columns, then it's the same box. So we assign same box into the class name. And now let's put that into our class name. Phew, this is quite confusing, I think, especially because this space has to be there. But with class names, it's a bit cleaner. Let's convert our code. Let's import class names. Now this is a function call. Let's put in cell. This means this will always be in the class name. And now let's put in an object. This is when we have conditionals. So we have same row and put the conditional next to it. So what this means, this table data element will always have the cell class. Optionally, it can have the same row class if this is satisfied, if it's selected and the row index is equal to the selected row. Do the same thing with column and box. And now we can delete this code. Awesome. So that's a bit cleaner, don't you think? So let's go over it again. This means it'll always have the cell class name. It might have the same row class name, but only if it's selected and the row index is equal to the selected row. Same for this one, if it's selected and the column index is the same as the selected column. And same box applies if it's selected and the row index divided by 3 is the same as the selected row divided by 3 and the column divided by 3 is the same as the selected column divided by 3. Now let's add the styles. So we want it to be lighter blue. Awesome. So when we click on a cell, we could see the same box is being highlighted, the row is being highlighted, and the column is also being highlighted. Very good, very good. Let's add the onChange here. So it takes in an event. It'll call a handle input function. We will make that later with the row index, the column index, and the value. Put that on the props. And let's define it in our app component. Again, it takes in the row index, the call index, and the value. We want to prevent users from typing in a letter. So only valid input is empty string or a number. So if the value is empty string or the value is between 1 to 9, then it's a valid input. Let's convert our board and puzzle variables into useState. Let's use null as the initial value. Let's delete our puzzle and board. Actually, instead of null, let's put the default value as this 2D array. Also for puzzle, then we set that cell in the board to be that value. take in the previous board. Let's map over the board. Take in the rows. And then we map over the rows. And remember, we have passed in the row index and the column index of what we want to change. So we have to make sure that they match this index and this index. And let's return the value. Remember, value is a string at this point, so we need to parse that into an integer. So if there's a value between 1 to 9, we parse int, we will make it a number. If it's not a value, so if it's an empty string, then it'll be null. So this is what happens if we run into the cell that we're currently editing. If we're not editing a cell, we just return that value in the cell. Let's pass the handle input into the grid. And now let's try to edit our board. Great, it's working. Halfway check-in. Let me hit you with a very serious question. Who wins? 1 gorilla or 100 humans? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd like to see what you think. And hey, if you're enjoying the video, like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Let's jump back and create our controls, the check, the reset, and the new puzzle control. Let's make a new component, call it controls. Let's make a handle check and a handle reset. Let's also create handle new puzzle function there. So these are all empty functions for now. Let's feed them into the controls component. Now let's consume it in our component. Now let's return our component. Let's make a container first. Let's have some margin to separate the grid from the controls. And now we have 3 buttons. Let's add a right margin to check and reset. Let's add an on-click function for all of these buttons. Awesome, that's it for this component. Now we just need the logic. For handle check, we are checking the solution. Now if you remember, the board is what our board currently is like. This puzzle is what's given to us at first. So let's say right now, puzzle is empty. That's a very hard puzzle. And that means puzzle of 0, 0 is null because there's nothing in there. Right now, board of the same row and column is also null because there's nothing there. If we change this first cell into 1, this will change the board 0, 0 into 1. But this doesn't change. Now we're going to have another state, but that's for the solution. Let's just have an empty array for the solution. So hopefully it's obvious to you. The solution will hold the value of this grid, but it's fully solved. So we'll have all numbers in there. But right now, let's have it as just an empty 2D array. Okay, onto the handle check function. Here we need to compare our board with our solution. How do we compare two 2D arrays? Well, one solution is we can flatten them into a 1D array. If they all match, then we set the status to correct. So let's make a status state, and we're setting it to correct. If there's at least one cell that's incorrect, then we set the status to try again. Let's show the status to the user. If there's a status, then we conditionally show an element. So what happens? If this is false, then we don't continue. If this is true, then we continue past this and we render this div. This is called conditional rendering. Let's make the status appear on top of the screen. Let's also add some styles. Okay, let's check our puzzle. It's correct because our solution is an empty board and the board is empty at the moment. We want it to appear in the middle of the screen. So if we add left of 50%, it'll start from here. If we add transform of translate x negative 50%, it will center it. Let's make it incorrect so we can see what it looks like. Great. that looks good. Let's handle the reset. What happens here is we set the board to be the puzzle. We set the status to empty string, and we set the selected cell to null because we're not selecting anything. Okay, let's test it out. Let's type in some random numbers here and reset. This should make it empty again. Now, if we check and it's correct, we want the green animation. So let's code that up. So we have a green count and set green count. Our default value is 0. So what the green count does, it tells us how many cells are green. If all of them are green, it would be 9 times 9 equals 81. So in our reset function, remember, we reset to a new puzzle. So let's set the green count to 0. Also set the green count to 0 in our handle new puzzle function. When it's incorrect, then it'll be 0. Now here's where we will set it to something other than 0. This is when it's all correct. So let's add in the animation. Let's initialize a count. The total cells is 81. And let's make an interval. And for every 30 milliseconds, we increase the count and we set the green count to that count. Now if that count, initially 0, is equal to the total cells, which is 81, then we remove this interval so it doesn't keep on going. Okay, let's style our grid. Pass in the green count into our grid. So in this row map function, we can find out the number of this cell. We can do that by multiplying the row index by 9 and adding column index. Now let's give it a class of green if the cell index is less than the green count. Now let's add the styles. Let's add a transition so it's not an abrupt change. Okay, let's test it out. Amazing. So that's our components done. We will be using this Sudoku API and it's very simple to use. What we can do is query various parameters. If we send a request to get a new grid, so in our case, our new puzzle, then we would need to send a request to here. If we need the solution, then we would do this. So this is the value and this is the solution. We can get the value and the solution, which is what we want. There's also one for difficulty. This won't be in the tutorial, but maybe you can play around with this later. Let's make a new JavaScript file. This will be where we fetch our puzzle, and let's export a function, fetch puzzle. It'll be async because we're using fetch. Let's copy paste what our endpoint will be. So this will be the Sudoku API endpoint, which is basically this, but also the solution is included. Rarely, we might run into an error. Let's say this API is down. We need to display an error in our app. So let's set a use state of the error first. Empty string as the default value. The fetch puzzle function, it would need the error, set status, set puzzle, set solution, set board, and set selected. First, we need to set the error and the status to be empty. Then we make the fetch. It'll be in a try catch block because it can run into an error. And if it does run into an error, we will set the error to that error or just failed to fetch puzzle. And I guess we can show the error as well. Okay, so let's fetch, get the response from that fetch. We await the fetch. We turn our response into JSON format. So let's go into the inspect element. Let's see what it returns us. So if we do the same line and Sudoku API, yes, allow pasting. Okay, let's try that again. And now we console log our results. Okay, so this is our response. And now we get the data. We need to await rest.json. So we turn that into JSON format. And now let's console log our data. It returns us an object. And inside that, there will be new board and grids. So this is our grids. This is what our puzzle will be. So in our grids, this is the 0th grid. Here we have a solution and here we have a value. So the value will be our puzzle and solution will be our solution. So let's get the grid out first. Let's get the puzzle and get the solution. So you can see there's zeros here. We want those to be turned into null. So what we can do is just map over the board. So for every row, we map that row, turn it into null if it's 0. Otherwise, it'll just be the number. And we do the same thing for solution. And now we set our puzzle and our solution and our board and our selection to null. Okay, now let's call the function in our app. We can use a use effect with a dependency array with no elements inside it. So an empty dependency array means this effect will only run once when the component mounts. So when it appears for the first time. Of course, let's import that from React. And now let's call our function. All right, look. The Sudoku board is being populated with the puzzle now. We also need to handle the logic for new puzzle. So let's go here and let's call the function again. So now if we click on it, it should change the puzzle. What if our API runs into an error? To simulate that, let's just delete a few characters from the string. So now it'll be an error. If I reload it, it will be an error. It doesn't tell me. So let's just change that. So you get our error. And if there's an error, then we return a message saying there's an error. Color red, so failed to fetch puzzle. Now let's fix our URL so it actually fetches. We can also do, if it's loading, if there's no board, then we can return a loading message. And for that to work, we need to set this as null. We can also set the puzzle as null too, and the solution as null. There we go. Okay, let's check our functionality here. So if we don't do anything and we check, it's incorrect, try again. If we put in some numbers and reset, it should go back to the grid, but without the 2's in here. Nice. And if you click new puzzle, it should change the puzzle. Awesome. Now let's actually get a complete board. Let me just complete this board real quick. Let me just use a shortcut. Instead of the board being set to puzzle, we're just going to set it to the solution. Just a handy dev testing just for development, you know? Okay, so now if we check, it should be all green, correct? And it's showing nicely. If you ran into any bugs when you're developing or have any ideas to expand this app, let me know in the comments. And if you want to build something next, I've got a Wordle clone tutorial right here. Click on it and let's keep the momentum going.